Whether your advisory firm has 1 or 5 people, compliance will always be an issue. RIA Compliance Concepts is more than just another service provider. We truly care about seeing our clients prosper. That's why we started our podcast, the RIA Compliance Collective, providing up-to-date compliance guidance. We're passionate about doing our job so you can focus on doing your job. We understand regulatory compliance like the back of our hands, from full-service RIA registration to annual compliance reviews and everything in between. We're here to get you there.
Hello, I'm Megan Campbell, and this is the RIA Compliance Collective. Thanks for joining us. I have with me Ivan Barretto and Collin O'Brien. How are you guys doing?
Outstanding. How about yourself?
Great. How about you, Ivan?
Everything's good on my end.
Fantastic.
It's Friday, so
that's always a good thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I know in just the conversations we've had in our roles as former regulators and as compliance consultants, the same questions continue to surface again and again. So we thought we'd shed some light on those topics. So in today's podcast, we are going to clear the air on some common misconceptions out there in the RIA world. One of the biggest questions I've received over the years has been regarding outside business activities, or OBAs. There's a lot of conflicting information and even like instructions on the U4 and the ADV and everything. Everything seems to be different. There's not a lot of consistency within those instructions. So I can see where there's a lot of confusion when it comes to what needs to be disclosed and where it needs to be disclosed, right? So I think what I really want to focus on here is the non-investment related OBAs, because I think everyone generally understands that if there is an investment related outside business activity, you're going to have to disclose it. And that's primarily because there could be a conflict of interest there when it comes to your clients, right? Like you could suggest they use your insurance service or go through the BD that you're registered with. So there's that conflict there. So those always have to be disclosed throughout all of the documents. But the biggest questions I know I don't know about you guys, that has to deal with those non-investment related businesses. So what would you need to disclose, basically? And if it's not investment related, if you are any sort of owner, director, officer, partner, employee, obviously, or an agent, like a real estate agent, those will always need to be disclosed in your U4. I know one of the biggest things that will come up is, well, if I'm disclosing it on my U4, I assume I have to disclose it on my brochure supplement. And that's not necessarily true. Your brochure supplement has a materiality threshold. So if you aren't spending 10% of your time, or you're not receiving more than 10% of your annual income from that outside business activity, it doesn't need to be in your brochure supplement. It only needs to be disclosed on your U4. Also, if it is for a tax-exempt or charitable organization, then it doesn't even need to be on your U4. There are a few exceptions to that, but that's the biggest issue. And I know one thing, and I think this is where I think people run into a lot of trouble, is things where you don't even realize maybe that would be considered an outside business activity because it's so passive. So, for instance, if you've set up an LLC to hold some family property or family land or whatever, and you've set up that LLC for liability reasons, if you're an owner of that LLC, it actually does need to be disclosed on your U4. And people tend to forget about that. They forget about it when they join a new business, and they forget about it just over the years because it's so passive. Ivan, do you kind of see that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that is common. Like you've mentioned, there's so many different places that you have to be cognizant of when you have outside business activities that you have to disclose, that you just definitely need to make sure and you look at all the various places and definitely review their instructions to, the Form U4, the ADV Part 1A and the Part 2A, or hire a consultant to help you with it, obviously. But yeah, I mean, the common things that we see all the time, or that we've seen all the time is that, they disclose this outside business activity, but in some regards, they may have to disclose it on their employment history and so forth. So yeah, it's a common thing that we come across all the time. And there's so many places that you need to be aware of, or it could potentially need to be disclosed if it doesn't fit the little categories that the Form Part 1A has already pre-developed or whatnot. How about you, Collin, on your end, as far as outside business activities? What are some of the things that you have come across with clients and that have asked you questions about?
Well, you kind of touched on one of the common errors that I've found over the years, that there's a lot of representatives and compliance officers that seeing that it's listed on the work history as their current employment, that it doesn't need to be listed in the OBAs, the outside business activities, which that's not true. Sadly to say, you have to list it in both and fall under those requirements under that Reps U4. Also, another common misinterpretation is that it states on the U4 that if it's a nonprofit that you don't have to list it as an OBA. And that's true, unless if you're working at that nonprofit as a signatory authority or you're controlling the finances for that nonprofit, then you'll have to list that because that's a potential conflict. And another thing that I always think is a best business practice is that have a stated procedure that gets pre-approval for all OBAs, for representatives, for an advisor, and have a process there. So you're not just getting hit at the annual review for a Reps U4 and he goes, oh yeah, I started at, so-and-so firm back in July. You don't want to get blindsided with that either. So just make sure that you have those procedures set and you're enforcing them to where, you can address conflicts before they arise instead of having to address it after you've already triggered that. So.
Excellent point.
And that's true because, ultimately, if you start something new, you have 30 days to report it. So, and it's required that you report it within 30 days. So, yeah, that's a great point that you made. But other than that, I think we've touched pretty much on the clearing the air on outside business activities and the common misconceptions that are involved with that. So I guess what's the next topic, Megan?
Well, Ivan, do you see anything out there or do you get a lot of questions? I know I've gotten several regarding fee invoicing and as far as any missteps that people usually have or any common misconceptions they may have about fee invoicing.
That's definitely something that Collin and I are pretty familiar with when we were former regulators and doing, our examinations of firms. One of the best tips that I can give an RIA firm is when you're looking at your fee billing, put yourself in the client's shoes. Technically, the client should be able to take everything that you've given them, the ADV Part 2, your fee schedule, your agreement, and take that home with them. And if they have any questions about how they're being charged, they should be able to have everything that they need to figure out how they're being charged. If you can't sit down and figure that out pretty cleanly and simply, then maybe that's something that there may need to be additional steps you should take as an RI to be more transparent in your calculation process or your fee billing process. One of the things that I'm a big advocate of is doing a fee invoice and providing a detailed fee invoice to clients. Now, that gets tricky because there's certain state jurisdictions that don't require it, and then there's some that do, where you basically break down the assets under management that you're billing or using the fee calculation method, the percentage that's being used when it's being billed and so forth. Those are some of the things that if you do that, you increase the transparency and the trust in your relationship with the client. But like I said, it's a recommended business practice in some states, but then it's required in some states that you do that per their regulations. Basically, that's something that definitely will help with clearing the air with fee calculations for clients. Another topic of discussion, there's some advisors that don't realize that you can charge a ongoing asset management fee for assets that are not market related and that are private investments, as long as there's a quarterly due diligence process and you can document that you're doing your quarterly due diligence with advising on those assets with a client, you can charge a management fee on that. Another thing that we're coming across a lot lately is this model of retainer services that incorporates not only the asset management side of the business, but also the financial planning side as well. And they're charging a fixed monthly fee for that. Well, one of those things that advisors need to be aware of, if you're offering an ongoing retainer model, you definitely have to do something on an ongoing basis. It can't be one of those things where you charge them a monthly fee and there's not some kind of documentation that you're working with a client on an ongoing basis, and you're just doing like an annual checkup of the financial plan or wealth plan that you've created for a client, the regulators will kind of further eyebrow on stuff like that. So if you do a retainer model, you definitely want to make sure that you're justifying that by doing ongoing services with the client, whether it's client communication, documenting calls, creating a quarterly report or a monthly review or whatnot. But you definitely need to do something to justify an ongoing retainer fee that you're charging a client. But other than that, I mean, those are some of the things that some advisors have questions about all the time. And hopefully that helps clear the air on the fee invoicing.
I know that definitely answers a lot of the questions that I get on a regular basis, especially when it comes to, assets that aren't held at the custodian, as well as I know I've seen a lot of financial planners these days do the ongoing services, the retainer services, and they always have questions about being, one, allowed to do that, and then what extra steps they need to take to be compliant. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think the big key takeaway is make your services justifiable and document that, verifiable so the client can do it. And my biggest recommendation from all the advisors I've been into is apply the KISS principle. Keep it simple. The easier for people to understand, the easier they'll be satisfied with what you're charging. And there won't be any questions, because some people will trigger pretty quickly and they'll file a complaint with the regulator. Next thing you know, you're responding back to letters on something that's actually accurate, so that you agreed to. So just to save you a bunch of headaches in the future. So
yeah. And it's also, and the other part of it is, as an RIA, you definitely want to do a fee audit, either quarterly, semi-annually, or annual basis, to make sure your fees are being charged correctly to your clients. And then it gives you the opportunity to correct any overbilling errors that you may come across. And by no means am I telling you, if you have 300 clients, to do a fee audit of all 300 clients. Do a reasonable sample set of clients where you basically randomly select a few clients to make sure you review their fees and make sure that they're being billed correctly. And if you do come across a client that's being overbilled, or a couple of clients that are being overbilled, you definitely want to expand your sample to verify that this is not happening systemically through all your clients. And I mean, the biggest concern for the regulators typically is the inconsistency of billing your fees. They really have a big problem if you're overbilling clients. And if you've discovered your clients being overbilled, you definitely want to try to find out why and explain away if possible. But if it's something that can't be, explained, then you want to refund the client the overage of their fee, that management fee that you charge them, and make them whole.
Absolutely. So another thing that comes up quite frequently is the topic of custody. I know the SEC's come out with guidance over the years. They've had a no action letter that's pretty recent that's caused some confusion. And many RAs that I come across believe they don't have custody. Collin, can you shed some light on that?
Yes, there needs to be plenty of light to shed on this. The past 18 months, I've fielded hundreds of questions about custody, and a lot of advisors are very concerned that they want to be doing the right thing, and whether or not they need to get an annual audit or a surprise audit and file an ADVE or anything. They really don't know the definitions on what causes this. Custody is basically you having custody if a related person holds directly or indirectly client funds or security, or has any authority to obtain possession of them in connection with the advisory services that you provide to your clients. The SEC rule is promulgated under 20642. It basically defines the steps that you need to take and the definitions of that. But the main thing that we need to understand is, what exactly does physical custody look like? Physical custody, it's basically the possession symbol of client funds or securities. What does that look like? If you have discretionary authority, technically you're controlling those securities. But that being said, what you find is that if you have an arrangement to where you're authorized to withdraw client funds or securities maintained at the custodian at your instruction, you have physical custody. If you have a capacity such as general partner of a limited partnership or a managing member of a limited liability company, and you have legal ownership or a supervised person of legal ownership to access to client funds, you have physical custody. If you actually maintain in your possession stock certificates or checks that you're planning on putting into escrow or what have you, and if you're maintaining that for a period of time, you trigger physical custody. That puts you under the requirements of either an annual audit, depending on which state you're registered to, or a surprise audit if you're an SEC member firm. And there's some caveats to that surprise audit. And that kind of depends on whether you have the agreement set up with your client, the standing letter of authorization with your client, and some caveats that requires that I don't think we have enough time to go into.
One of the things that we're coming across a lot lately, well, not a lot, but we come across every once in a while, is that a client gives an advisor login access, their login access, the client's login access.
Right.
What is your interpretation regarding that as far as when it comes to the custody guidelines?
That is a definite definition of physical custody. If you have the logins to the client and not the advisory access logins, then you have physical custody over that account. That's why broker-dealers, custodians will have a separate login for advisors to be able to use their discretionary authority over their client accounts. That being said, you can withdraw your fees. You can have discretionary authority, and that's called constructive custody. So as long as you have that limited power of attorney signed through your advisory agreement, that's okay. And so as long as it's approved by a custodian. One of the things that seems to be also an issue is custodial agreements inadvertently triggering physical custody for an advisor. If you're thinking that you just have discretionary authority and that's it, but your custodial agreement says that gives the advisor the right to receive money, securities, or property of every kind and dispose of the same, or be able to provide instructions without any direction from the client or any transactions set from the client, then you could have custody issues. If you allow the advisor to disperse any cash from your cash account for any purposes, then you could have custody issues. And that can be a definite hang up for some advisors out there. What you can do as far as making sure that you don't trigger the custody rule, well, first off, make sure that you go over your custodial agreement to make sure that there's no statements in there that could possibly be construed or allow you to have any form of physical custody, moving money in and out of the account, getting disbursements or what have you. Also, if you accept checks to forward to the custodian, you need to maintain a log showing that chain of custody, which means that you log who gave you the money, what date that you received the check, and or securities, and when you forwarded it and who you forwarded it to. And that's basically how you can cover for that. So yeah, that's the basic questions and concerns that a lot of advisors have. Now, if you fall under the requirements to have a surprise audit, there's some exemptions there that we could probably go in further on. But most of our clients now don't have to really worry about that. So
fantastic. That's all really great information. And I know with, receiving checks and whatnot from clients, I know a few people will just refuse, or a few firms will just refuse to accept the checks and will send like a prepaid envelope that's addressed to the custodian to the client. So this way there's never, that instance of them taking custody of that check. So that might be a good practice as well.
Why have that liability?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, this has all been really great. I know we covered quite a bit of information, and we could probably dedicate entire shows to each one of these topics that we've covered today. But I hope we were able to shed some light on them, and if nothing else, help you, either rest easier or think a little bit more about how you're handling these topics. Did either of you guys have anything else to add?
There's a lot of concerns that advisors have to worry about, and hopefully this will make their lives a little easier and a little bit less stressful.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you for joining us today, and hope you join us next time on the RIA Compliance Collective. Until next time, we're here to get you there.
Thank you for listening to the RIA Compliance Collective. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to experience the RIA Compliance Concepts difference yourself, visit riacc.io. From mock audits to customized compliance procedures, ongoing compliance assistance, and beyond, we're here for you always. Keep listening to discover more on how you can keep your advisory firm compliant so you can focus on achieving your goals. RIA Compliance Concepts. We're here to get you there.